So let's talk about cutting the fabric. This is really, there's two things that people, when they say that they don't want to work with Cuddle or they don't want to work with Minky in general, it's two reasons. It shifts, it moves, and it makes a mess. And these are two things that are qualities of the fact that it is a plush fabric and that it is a knit fabric. The reason it makes a mess is because when we're cutting it, we tend to cut the fibers that are on the right side of the fabric, and then that leaves the little bits, kind of gives it a little haircut, and we have the little extras. I have a couple of different samples here that I want to show you. This is a piece of Cuddle 3. And the one thing to remember about Cuddle is that it's important to note the nap, and it is directional. So I can, because I've worked with this long enough, I can see which direction it is just by looking at it. And I can tell it's this direction. But a lot of times it's really hard. And if we put it this way, I can't really see a difference. But if I put it this direction, I can totally see a difference. And that's how I know that this is the bottom and this is the top. So it actually goes like this. So this is top to bottom. It'll go smooth. So a lot of times what I like to do is to mark it on the back when I'm figuring this out. And I know that this is my nap direction. So I'll mark it. And that way I have this to reference back to when I'm putting my patterns on. I can also stretch it this direction. And I can't stretch it this direction. So it just barely has any stretch here, but has quite a lot of stretch this direction. So that's an easy way to say that the lengthwise of it doesn't have stretch, the widthwise does. So there are going to be patterns that you'll find, especially the Shannon Fabrics patterns, that will use this stretch here to your benefit. The scarf is an example of that it doesn't lay as nicely when you cut it the other direction. So we have you cut it length of fabric so that it lays better. And this one I can kind of swoof it around, and it kind of looks the same from a lot of ways, but if I push it this direction, I can see that it stands straight up. So I can see that it changes the color and it changes the way that it works. So I know this is top down. So again, I would go ahead and mark it. All right, and that helps when I'm going to cut things out that I know which direction it goes. So a lot of times when I'm working with the luxe fabric, I'm doing pieces like this sort of thing for a stuffed animal or something. And I want to trace this on the back rather than trying to place it on the front and cut around this. So if I go ahead and I pin this, you can start to see how it will distort the shape of it because of the fact that it is knit and fluffy. So when I cut around this, this is not flat at all. So you can see it even better here, that you're not going to get a very accurate cut because of the fact that it's a knit. So if I instead place this on the back, and I've got my little Sew Tights board here, so I'm just going to use the magnets because that's really easy. I'm going to put this here. So my nap direction is marked. I know that it's going to coordinate with this here. I could put these on here, stick this down, trace around it. Oops. And then I have a much more accurate shape. So when I cut this out, it's going to be the shape that I want and not some distorted thing. So it's really important to be able to cut it from the back for that reason. The same goes with the Cuddle 3. I do it on the back as well with this because it's just easier to see and do. If you really want to cut from the front, you can, but you can't trace. So you have to place this here, keep the pattern on here, and then hope it doesn't move on you. So I'd rather trace them out onto the back and then cut them. Cuddle 3, because it has a shorter nap, makes a lot less mess. I tend to just use a ruler and my rotary cutter. Okay, so I can absolutely just cut it. Totally fine. It has a little bit of nap that comes off the side. This will be different if I cut it this direction. So this was a lengthwise cut. All right. If I cut it widthwise, we're going to get a little bit more of a shed. Okay. And the reason for that is because the nap is coming this way. It's coming down. So when I cut it, I'm actually cutting off the bottom. This one, I'm cutting down the side of it. So when I cut lengthwise, there's no nap that's necessarily hanging off this way. It's just the tiniest little bit. When it's this way, it's hanging off the bottom. So I've cut quite a bit off. All right. I will tell you, this is the easiest thing to just clean up as it goes. Do not let it get pressed into your board over and over again. If it's in your board, like you could see it just stayed there, but then I can swoop it off. If it's actually staying in your board, it's generally because you're pushing too hard and your blade is not sharp. So really change your blades often. It will make a huge difference in making sure that you're not destroying your board because you're pushing really hard. And it'll save your sanity because you're not going to have to try to scrub out minky out of there. So for the Luxe Cuddle, it's a little bit different because you can see here how much of this nap, the fibers here, fall off the end. So when I cut this, I'm going to have a huge amount of mess that's just a lot of fluff already. So I know just looking at this, I don't want to cut this with a rotary cutter to have all that extra fibers floating around. Not fun. So I don't, almost never will cut it with a rotary cutter. Instead, I will choose a pair of scissors or a blade. So we're going to talk about scissors just briefly. I have a few different ones that we're going to talk about. Okay. So the biggest thing here is micro serrated, and I'm going to grab these big guys too because they are micro serrated. These big guys are my Kais and I love them, but they are way too big to be able to cut precise little curves on here. So these are for other projects. But these smaller ones are also all micro serrated. So these are the Femore ones. These are, I think they're called 6-inch comfort handle scissors. And they have, you can see the blade length. It's pretty short here. This one, these are the Karen K Buckleys. The blades are a little bit longer on this one. These have soft handles. These have hard plastic handles. Okay, so that's a big difference there. These are the Olfa scissors. These are also micro serrated. They're a shorter blade, similar to the Femores, and also have the hard handles, but they are smaller handhold. Okay, so that's the real difference between them. They are all excellent scissors. They all have good micro serrated blades on them and will cut cuddle. My favorite personally are the Karen K Buckleys because they're the most comfortable in my hand because of these rubber handles. All right, so when I'm cutting this, I'm going to cut a little bit out with my scissors. I'm going to show you what I do. So really all I'm going to do is cut a little snip in here. If I'm cutting out something like this, I don't necessarily want to come in from the edge because I'm just going to cut a whole lot of fibers that don't need to be cut. I really only need to cut this part here. So I'm going to stick this under here. And what I do is I kind of pull it up off the table and then I cut just the backing as much as possible. So it's just little bitty snips, because as soon as I take a big snip, one, I have less control of the curve if I'm doing something like a stuffed animal, but the other is I'm much more likely to cut all the fibers underneath. So the same reason I wouldn't want to use those big scissors. All right, if I do that, I can show you, I can pull that apart and there's nothing here. It's all going to be stuck on here. And I'll be able to pull some off, but it makes it for a much less messy cutting experience. Okay, the other tool that I really like for cutting is this, which is the Olfa SAC-1 blade. You'll see it referred to as a craft knife in most patterns. It is, I always like to describe it as basically it's a X-Acto knife got married to a box cutter and had a baby. This is what happened. So you get the really sharp point here of an X-Acto knife, but the snap off blades of a box cutter. So you get these and it has a couple of blades in it that have, I think, 10 blades, 10 like little blades in here. And so it will last you for a long time. And then the blades, you can buy replacements for those. So they work really well. The key with this is to really kind of hold some pressure against it, and then I just drag this along the back of it. And this one, I will say, it takes a little bit of practice to get it, and it will usually cut a little bit more. This is a brand new blade that I popped out of there last night, so I have to press it just a little bit softer. Okay, and then it will cut through less. So the fresh blade will always cut a little deeper than the other when it's been used a little bit. So there we go. Okay, so now you can see all of this. If I would have cut this out with a rotary cutter, it would have just left all of that mess all over my board. Instead, it's here. You can get the mess off of here, but doing it this way, even if I have a little mess, I can clean it up like this and it's all just very contained for me rather than floating everywhere.